Hey, folks, and welcome to the show. This is Counter Clipping Show number 151 for November 4th, 2023. I'd like to thank you all for coming. Let me get the ticker up. Oh, I didn't update the link for the Discord community. If anybody wants that, just reach out to me. My email address is in the ticker. So we've got what hopefully will be an interesting show this evening. We are, first of all, drinking Jack Daniel's Single Barrel Rye, bottled at 47%. Now, I'm not the hugest fan of the regular Jim Beam or Jack Daniels, I should say. However, their specialty bottlings do tend to be at least interesting, and this one's quite good. And I like American rye whiskey a lot. I felt like that one particular counter was not quite square. So we are clipping End of Empire. We should get another sheet of these clips tonight. We will see. And then hopefully we can get it organized. The 3D printer is still down. I have other personal business and news that we'll update everybody on in a couple of minutes. What the hell just happened here? In the meantime, while that figures itself out, please do remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are not already subscribed. Oh, I see what that did. That's interesting. Okay. This weird tabs thing going on in Notepad, which is what I typically use to just take off the cuff notes in, oddly enough. Oops, we're screwing it up. All right. So like, comment, and subscribe if you have not done so already. And by all means, super chats and super stickers are on. It's a great way to get your comment highlighted. If you do throw a super chat or super sticker my way, I am guaranteed to see it, even though I might not see it instantly based on how thick and dense the chat might be, as it is sometimes. But I don't have a slideshow to manage tonight either, so there's that. There's also the Patreon and a bunch of other ways to help the channel out in the there's another one like this in the video description, so check those out. Special shout outs this week. I didn't get the ticker updated. Special shout outs this week to Daniel McCord for joining us at the hero level, Mark Nelms for joining us at the swordsman level, Tony Perino for joining us at the swordsman level, and Kyle Harris for stepping all the way up to the Myrmidon level. So the support is much appreciated. I really do appreciate it. I got my, I didn't like rush to get my GMT order in because I didn't order any games. I just ordered empty boxes, and I got mine like a week ago. So some folks still are waiting. Maybe they process supply orders faster. I have the vaguest idea. So before we get any further with that, let's say hello to Six Actual, Achilles, Ellen Salazar, Alistair Logie, Brant from the Armchair Dragoons, BC Games, Bible Board Games, Bob Kowalczyk, Chad Kennedy, Chet Bell, Cole Bieri, Krusty Captain, Daniel McCord, David Silverthorne, David Zell, Dustin Mitchell, Ed Holtzman, HUN6442, Iggy Crichtel, the legend himself, Fucko is here, Jeff Anderson, Jeff Beeler, Jeffrey Edwards, Joe Okabayashi, John Longshore is in the house, John Madison, we'll see you in a matter of weeks, quite a few weeks, but weeks. John C. from the sunny Philippines, John Clark, Carl Crater from the Wargame Bootcamp, Kyle Harris, Lee Grant, Mark G., Mark McNair, Mark Hodgkinson, Mason Duke, Matt Davidson, Meandering Mike, Michael Simon, Mo Romaniuk, Molotov Cockatiel Games, Palmer Eldridge, Paul Sin, Richard Leclerc, Stacking Limit is here, Stigler is in the house, Duke Joe is here. Joe, thanks for stopping by. Todd Cox, Tony Mammal, Vicky, welcome back to the show, William Bird, and Wolf Dog. So thanks so much for stopping by this evening, where we will probably have a slightly less contentious thing than we had last Monday, or last Tuesday, I should say. So the topic tonight is thesis and argument in Wargames, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the topic. But I would like to just mention, not that it's been a problem so far, but one thing that is not our topic tonight, and I am not going to engage with, is the comments that we discussed on the Tuesday show with Dan. I have said more than enough on that. That has already received all the oxygen it needs and then some. It is not going to get anything else from me tonight. Mark Herman is here. Mark, thanks for stopping by. And Thomas Prowl is here. Thomas, I'm very much enjoying what I see of, and have actually played a little bit of Dice of Decision 2 out of Axis Empire's Ultimate Edition so far. So it's extremely promising. Even the anti-strategic level World War II game contingent seems to be fairly impressed with it. Thesis as in design argument. We'll talk about what I mean because I think it does require some explanation. So we're not going to talk about that thing that Fred said. So please don't engage. Don't do that in the chat, and don't engage with other people doing that in the chat. I'll have to put somebody in timeout. I don't want to put anybody in timeout. For the first time in probably 2 years, maybe more, I actually had to block somebody from the channel over that video, and I locked down the comments, which is something I don't think I've ever done. So it was Thursday. Did I say Tuesday? Okay, so the reason I said Tuesday is because this week we're having what should be fun/torture. We have a special show tomorrow night at 8 p.m. And no enemies here. Dan, the dancing man, is here. How about that? That never happens. Dan is never here for this show. But we do have a special show with Dan and Mr. Jim Ozarski tomorrow regarding Ridley Scott's made-for-television movie, Napoleon. So that ought to be a lot of fun. Bring your marshmallows to that, folks. The comments are locked on that video. In terms of like YouTube comment sections in general, it really was not that bad. But for this channel, it was bad. So out it went. And the person I blocked was not because they disagreed with me, but because they were being dishonest about it. I've got no patience for that from them or anybody else. So tomorrow night, 8 p.m., which is, so it is a chit show special, but we'll have the regular chit show on Thursday. All right. So anyway, how you have not yet been blocked is a mystery to us all. So I could block you if you like, but anyway, so what I mean by I want to say it was Cole Worley that said so. I don't really like the term argument, but I think I see what he's getting at, and I do approve of the idea that there should be something or set of things that a war game designer is telling you through their design. And we'll have a couple examples to work through here. What is a shadow ban exactly? I don't know what that means. I can't put people in timeout where it's like, let's say I want to time out fucko here. I don't know how long timeout lasts. 10 minutes, 50, I don't know, an hour, the rest of the show. I have no idea. I didn't actually time out anybody, but I can. And that's not a block. And I don't want to do that. Other than actual spammers, I have, like I said, not blocked anybody in a very long time. So, but I don't want to talk about that. And I don't want to talk about Napoleon because we're going to get into that last night. I guess I will say, for those who haven't already heard me say this, it's bad. It does have some production virtues. The costumes are good. Some of the photography is outstanding. But the central performance and the central narrative are both really, really bad. Historical accuracy is also really quite bad, but it's true of Gladiator and Braveheart, and those are great movies. So while I would have nitpicked that, I am less inclined to criticize it here in the wake of other, I think, significant flaws with the film. So I do agree with Mark Herman, who said that the costumes are outstanding and should get an Oscar nomination. The costumes are outstanding. I'm trying to remember if I finished watching Prometheus. I think I did, and I don't think I dozed off. I dozed off during Austerlitz. So Prometheus is terrible. However, I've also heard that the one after that, Alien Covenant, was better, but I don't know. I mean, Ridley Scott can make a good movie when he would like to. So is all I got. Yeah, we will let Jim plug this tomorrow, because I actually have already read this, and while I haven't seen everything on Jim's list because it's Jim, the stuff I have seen is universally superior to this thing. So I mean, the costumes are really, really good, though. They even get the covers on the hats right, which impressed me. Well, ask Jim about that. Maybe Jim can spot some flaw in the covers on the hats that I didn't, but there was that. Lee Grant, thanks so much. Much appreciated. For the support is much appreciated. And I've actually heard this Godzilla -1, which is not is it Warner Brothers or Universal or whoever is doing the Godzilla movies over here? This is not that. This is a Japanese film, and it's called Godzilla -1, and I haven't even seen a trailer for it, but it's doing extremely well internationally. Crushed Woodford Reserve is I'm not crazy about Woodford Reserve, but it's good. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just as I'd probably rather drink it than Maker's Mark, I'd say. Um, I'd probably rather drink it than I would Buffalo Trace, to be honest. And that's probably a minority opinion. Prometheus is two movies stuck into a blender. And what came out is an unintelligible, brain numbing smoothie. A smoothie made mostly of poop. So, was not a fan of that. And yeah, Gilbert Collins, this was actually today. I should mention this. Gilbert Collins had a video today about he spent probably less than 60 seconds spread out over the course of the video on the Ridley Scott movie, but he talked about a lot of other Napoleonic productions that are totally worth your time, some of whom I had not even heard of. There are a few war games that contain Godzilla, so I can vouch for that. There's Godzilla in We Must Tell the Emperor too, which is fantastic. So, End of Empire is a very interesting game that came out of Command Magazine. I don't Old Command Magazine, and Compass redid it and included a bunch of additional stuff that was not in the original Command Magazine version. So, why this is interesting is it's kind of the entire North America wars in the latter half of the 18th century. So the box has 1744 to 1782 on it. So it covers the American Revolution and the French and Indian War and some other stuff that's maybe less well explored in wargaming. And there's been some fan created expansions for it that have touched on some other topics as well. It's a really ambitious game. The best video on it that I can think of off the top of my head, Just a Guard did some video on it. And he did not have entirely positive things to say at the end, but I watched it and then went out and tracked down a copy anyway. I tracked down a copy at the War Zone, the legendary hellhole of a game store in the south end of Cleveland. A lot of stuff there. Bring a flashlight and possibly a hard hat. So there's that. Oh, this is true. I had forgotten about this because I have the older edition. I don't have the expansion, or maybe I have the expansion. I haven't played this. It actually looks intriguing from a mechanical standpoint. Now, of course, I went and ran this down, paid, I don't know, 80, 90 bucks for it. And then literally a week later, 2 weeks later, maybe I went to Compass Expo and, oh yeah, we're reprinting it. So it's coming back. It is the ATR, the Command Magazine game. It absolutely is. Drew, thanks for stepping by. So, Dan, I told you, give me the 20-second clip, and we can play that whenever it comes up. And you can even update it if you like from time to time with the current toilet status. Maybe we'll put like a toilet meter graphic on the screen or something like that. Joe Prez, I didn't say hello already. Thanks for stopping by. So I'm not telling anybody to not go see Napoleon. I'm just telling you low expectations. I went in with low expectations, and those met. Mission accomplished. Is all I got to say at this time. So Carl Fung, thanks for stopping by as well. Hopefully I'm not missing too many comments here. In many cases, and this is true of a lot of movies specifically, where whoever's making the movie, who's making the decisions, whether that's the producer or the director or the writers or whatever. In some cases, the history is better drama than what we saw on screen. Now, I think I have a real high opinion of Gladiator and even Kingdom of Heaven, as long as you watch the director's cut. But certain other Ridley Scott movies have not been great. Again, if you want a really very good Ridley Scott Napoleon movie, The Duelists is still out there, so check that out. Well, maybe my expectations were insufficiently low, Stigler. That is possible. Kevin Featherly liked Godzilla -1. I should at least watch the trailer of it so I know whether I want to see it or not. Does it have subtitles? Is it a subtitle thing? I mean, subtitles doesn't bother me. I'm just curious. I'd generally speaking rather have maybe not in a movie like that necessarily, but I would often rather have subtitles than have dubbing, because dubbing's often done poorly too. So there we go. Dan's toilet has indeed made an appearance again. 169 people here. Holy cow! Napoleon Dynamite is preferable. I think I heard that walking out of the theater. Actually, I might even have said that. I hate that movie. Actually, at least it's kind of its own thing, right? In any case, Jonathan Dyer, thanks for stopping by. So, somebody should design a conflict simulation about Dan's toilet. I put the challenge to the designers that are in the crowd. I shouldn't be using this thing; it's way too loud. But not every counter seems to be landing right in the clipper here. It's not every counter, but it's like there's maybe certain that are angles that are not 90 degrees or something like that. Brant, you hate Napoleonics. So I don't think I think for you this route is probably the best for the best. So anyway, Alan Salazar says that S&T's game on the Italian Ottoman War is pretty good. Joe Miranda game. That's the kind of thing I think Joe Miranda is a good designer for, right? Offbeat topics like that, which I am generally speaking in favor of. John Madison, I'm not even going to highlight that comment because it's making me slightly nauseous. The toilet game had better be solitaire, but if it's not, I'm not going to kink shame, but we're not talking about it on this show either. So, Dan, we will get by the time the show's over, Greg Smith may in fact have designed this entire game. So Masters of the Air looks very promising. We'll see. What else was coming on Apple TV Plus besides Napoleon? Something else was coming on Apple TV Plus that I was looking forward to. It could be that. This is possible. Greg may already have designed that game. So anyway, we are 17 minutes. Oh, one more thing I should mention is that all of the giveaway stuff from last show, last Monday, has in fact shipped at this time. Took several days longer to get that done than I wanted it to, but it did in fact get done, and I am delighted that it is out of my hair. We might still have a sale thing just so I can free up some additional shelf space. I'll tell you what, I have not watched this whole movie, Perfidious Albion. However, this is fairly convincing. I'm not sure I've seen this done better. It was definitely not done quite as seamlessly in Martin Scorsese's The Irishman, where it's okay. It's just that this technology is coming a long way. I've heard good things about Silo, actually. It is based on a series of novels, as I recall, and the cast is very good, so it's worth a look. You always got to worry about these TV shows though when they're like, oh well, we ended in a cliffhanger. Are we getting a season 2? Because sometimes we don't. So there we go. Stigler is the first person I would think of when it comes time to work on the Vassal module. I could, to be completely honest, probably I don't want it to be tonight. I could probably do an entire show on this. Because I'm a big fan of the book. I'm a big fan of the sort of, I was about to use the word historiography, but sort of tracing the story of the various attempts to adapt Dune, starting with Alejandro Jodorowsky in the 70s, and that was going to be something else if it had happened, but like a lot of the production design ended up getting rolled into other movies like Alien and stuff. So if there is a documentary called Jodorowsky's Dune that is absolutely 100% worth your time to watch, whether you would consider the resulting film, had it been made, to be a complete disaster or not. Chad Kennedy, thank you so much for the support. It is much appreciated. This would be great. This would probably be some of the best Order of Battle research I could think of. Mark Herman design Napoleon versus Godzilla. It will be approximately as historically accurate as Ridley Scott's Napoleon, especially if Carl Reese does the OB research. So I think that is a fantastic. I think that is a fantastic idea. I did, if I didn't mention this last week, and I might have, I did get billed for Norman Conquest. Now this hit with the bill for the errata counter sheet, and I didn't get a refund, but because I was getting billed for two things and not just the counter sheet, I think that got that the error with the zero shipping that turned into not zero shipping didn't happen. I have not even seen the trailers for the Fallout series yet. Merv's got pretty good taste in that kind of stuff. Um, Slow Horses. I'll have to investigate this, Greg Grant. But thank you for the recommendation. This was it, actually. This actually looks good. I've been sort of lukewarm on the movies that they've been doing. They've been, I think, a bit hit and miss. But none of them has been dreadful, but none of them has been outstanding either. But they've all been watchable. I didn't doze off during Austerlitz in any of them, for example. The so Well, I have not seen. I'm not sure season two is out yet. No, I think season two is out. So I had a pretty negative response to this. However, that said, there's at least in that first season, which is approximately eight. So I'm also a big fan of these books. I am aware of how dry they are in the author and all that stuff. But I like the books. They're very intellectual and going to be very difficult to adapt to a movie type of format. So I had a pretty negative reaction to the Foundation show on Apple TV Plus, like I was with not Game of Thrones, which was pretty good from the beginning. But with what was the other damn thing? Oh, Wheel of Time. I'm willing to watch the season two if I'm paying for the service anyway. I'm not currently paying for that service, but if I start paying for it, then I will totally watch Foundation season two. Um, the There's at least three really exceptionally good, and I'm not talking about fidelity to the source material, because at least one of these three really exceptionally well done episodes from that first season leans very heavily on some of the elements that they just made up and aren't in the original books. And I thought it absolutely worked. Um, However, much of the rest of season one is just hot garbage from a top to bottom standpoint. Again, independently of whether it's adherent to the source material or not. Oh yeah, well, Jodorowsky is crazy, but I mean, it would have been off the hook. It wouldn't have been the kind of movie that anybody else would have made. So again, I could spend an entire show on this. I have put rather a lot of thought into the various adaptations, and to date, the only movie review on this channel is of Denis Villeneuve's Dune, which I liked a lot. I think it lacks a little bit of the imaginative spark in the production design and the costumes and stuff like that David Lynch's version did. The costumes and production design in that thing were just amazing. Um, but it does get the story more right, partially due to less compression than the David Lynch version does. Now, the Sci-Fi Channel mini series. So there's two Sci-Fi Channel mini series. Okay, there's Frank Herbert's Dune, and there's Frank Herbert's Children of Dune. And last I checked, these were not available anywhere for streaming, but you could buy the DVDs, and I've seen both of those as well. The first mini series does a very good job of sticking to the core themes of the book. And it's 2 hours with commercials included, I believe, episode mini series. Where it falls down is exactly in the places where the David Lynch version shines. In general, while the screenplay is not that good, the story is Herbert's story. The screenplay is and the dialogue and all that is not terrible. A lot of that is problems with the actors. There's a lot of unknown actors in that production, and a lot of them are not very good. I think William Hurt, well, it made sense on paper to cast William Hurt as Duke Leto. I think was just as wooden and uncharismatic as William Hurt often, but not always is. And he was a big fan of the book. That's why he wanted to do it, and that's great. But I did not think his performance was effective. The lady they had playing Lady Jessica, whose name I have right on the tip of my tongue, but it's not quite there, is a good actress, but she is too warm for Jessica. Rebecca Ferguson did not have that problem. And Francesca Annis from the David Lynch movie did not have that problem. And in general, the casting in the Lynch film is amazing. So the mini series version has some cast problems. In addition, the production design is good, but only where in those places in the production where they didn't have to do production design because they found an interesting looking like actual set somewhere that they could use as a set, like at some Czech cathedral or something like that. I think is where the final duel between Paul and Fade happens. And those parts are really good. Everything else looks like it's on a stage. It's really exceptionally cheap looking, and some of it's like hilariously cheesy too. The guild representatives of the Spacing Guild in that production have been informally labeled the Spice Nazis. I mean, the performances on these guys, along with their costumes, has got to be seen to be believed. So interestingly, however, the guy they got, Alec Newman, who played Paul Atreides in that, is okay. He's too old and too old looking, right? Timothy Chalamet's too old too, but he looks like a kid, so it's fine. But Alec Newman is fine, and he gets better as the miniseries proceeds. He's least convincing in part one. Now, there is a sequel miniseries called Frank Herbert's Children of Dune, which adapts the second and third books of the series, Dune Messiah, and the book called Children of Dune. And in just about every way, a lot of the cast is the same, but they did replace a couple of key individuals. Notably, they replaced Stilgar with a mean looking dude. I forget the actor's name, but this actor was I'm trying to remember what the actor's name is because he's been in other stuff. He was a James Bond villain. The actor in the first miniseries that played Gurney Halleck is the guy who was the main gangster in Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. And he's also a good actor and just wrong for the part. Um, the I'm going to get to this Molotov cocktail comment in a second here because I want to see that, but I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. So the second follow-up miniseries, Children of Dune, recasts all the characters that were weakly cast in the original. They got Edward Atherton as Duncan Idaho, who's a much better Duncan Idaho than the rando that they're from Czech Community Theater that they had in the first one. They recast Lady Jessica with Alice Craig, which is like, wow, that's perfect for casting right there. And of course, you don't have to deal with the leaden performance of William Hurt, right? Because he's dead by then. They bring back Ian McNeice, who is marvelous in both miniseries, and I love Ian McNeice. And in fact, probably the single best piece of casting, underused, but other than that, the single best piece of casting out of Ridley Scott's Napoleon is in fact Ian McNeice as Louis XVIII. Brilliant piece of casting. He's got about 2 lines. All right, and then we got the Denis Villeneuve movie, which I like I said I really liked. I liked it and had opinions about it enough to have a video about it. So yeah, I could talk, and I have in fact talked about this for 10 minutes. So let's move on. If I have a coughing fit, it's because of COVID. So recovery of COVID. So Molotov Cockatiel says the best sci-fi trilogy which I'm watching for is the and which I'm waiting for the TV adaptation is the Three Body Problem. Okay, so there's the Netflix production, which I believe is what you are talking about, and that's going to come out next year. I have not read the books; they're supposed to be good. I probably ought to. I am looking forward to this adaptation as well. It has a very good-looking cast. However, there is already a Chinese production of the Three Body Problem, I believe subtitled, and I believe that's available on YouTube. We're gonna copiously drink from the water this evening. So that's potentially worth a look if you really like the books. All right, so you can he's almost unrecognizable. Stellan Skarsgård is very menacing as Baron Harkonnen in the Villeneuve movie. Another vote for Slow Horses from Mark Herman, so that means I probably should see it. Some people didn't like the book. I might like the book. I don't know. It's got history hooks, so I might. And we got questions here in the chat, which have probably already been answered about where is Slow Horses streaming and what is it about. I assume this is aimed at me, Bob Kowalczyk, game playthrough in the future. So yes, but there's like a bunch of stuff ahead of that, including the Frederick the Great video, which I honestly, in the wake of Compass Expo, in the wind up to Compass Expo, and in the wake of coming home from Compass Expo with COVID again, then I just didn't. I kind of lost momentum on it. So I still want to do that. And then the third one's still going to be, or fourth one, I suppose, is still going to be War Between the States, which I don't have to do a lot of research on. I'd never played Frederick the Great. Ooh, it's not sounding good. So a lot of times, the first season of a TV show, particularly a genre TV show, in my experience, maybe that's because I've seen a lot of them, has to do a lot of build-up work that subsequent seasons then can build from. Um, One franchise that managed to get away from this because there was a movie that the whole thing was originally based on was Stargate SG-1, because they had the movie to do that legwork for them, so they could kind of get right into it. Babylon 5 had I don't want to call it a weak first season, but they were doing a lot of build up on that first season. And a lot of the episodes individually, you really only see how they're tied into the bigger story in retrospect. Now, Star Trek: The Next Generation, back when it originally came out on DVD in a fancily packaged and very overpriced box set of uh, DVDs, I picked it up, and I had seen the episodes years before, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, and there's like 25 episodes of the season. I'm kind of watching and thinking, I'm like halfway through, I'm like, this is not nearly as bad as I remember. And then we got to the block of like 5 or 6 consecutive episodes where Wesley saves the ship and a bunch of other dumb shit happens. And I'm like, okay. So they backloaded all the bad stuff at the back end of the season here. So there has been talk of a Ringworld movie or TV thing for many years. Sci-fi had a hook on it at one point, and that never ended up happening. Now, Robert Phillips says that season 2 is much better than season 1. Still not faithful to the books. I mean, okay. Wheel of Time cliffhanger wasn't. I feel like I've missed a preceding comment here, Mark. I did watch season 2, and I thought season 2, it still departs a lot from the books, but there's kind of a built-in rationale for doing that in those books, so it's kind of a little easier to swallow. And I felt like it stood on its own better than Foundation did by the end of season 2. All right, we're trying to get to the ooh, yeah. So Wheel of Time is so. I think Robert Jordan probably would have agreed with you about this, about the first book in that series feeling fairly derivative. I don't know that series ever really escapes from that, but it is nevertheless very well done in places until it kind of gets bogged down by its own mass, and Jordan got lost in his own story, and lost the ability to kind of continue moving forward. Now, The Expanse, I just like. That first book, however, is so. I think I've talked about this before on stream, but if I haven't, here you go. So the author credited to the Expanse books is James S.A. Corey. Now, that's actually 2 authors, Ty Frank and Daniel Abraham. And by the time they decided to collaborate on doing this, which I think it actually originally started as an RPG pitch, by the time they collaborated on doing this, Daniel Abraham had published like 2 trilogies and some other stuff and was a seasoned author. And Ty Frank was not at that point. So the way the first book is written, and possibly subsequent books too, but it's obvious in the first book, is that certain characters are written by Daniel Abraham and certain characters are written by Ty Frank. And you could tell which the seasoned characters the seasoned writer was writing, because Joe Miller is fantastic in that first book. And Holden is much, much less interesting. He was written by Ty Frank. Both Holden and Ty Frank get much better as the series progresses. And a great deal of, although the sort of initial situation is reasonably conventional in that first book, it builds up just tremendous narrative momentum, and the series was amazing as well. The Shannara TV series was, in fact, awful. Jared Harris is great choice to Harry Seldon. Great casting, and in fact, the cast is generally very good. Lee Pace is fantastic in it. He's not given, even his dialogue is not necessarily that bad. It's really the plotting that I think has let that series down. I read like the first 7 or 8 of these before I just threw my hands up and said, you know what? it's going to be 3 years before the next one where nothing will happen again. I give up. So, oh, Prophetic Albion says these are available on YouTube. So there you go. Rings of Power is also seriously problematic. All right. Nordic Maelstrom didn't like any of the actors in the new Dune. I generally liked all the actors in the new Dune. I thought Jason Momoa is probably the weakest link there. Best Dune game is hands down the old Avalon Hill game, to be honest. The new Dune RPG from Modifius, I think it's Modifius, looks beautiful and might be good. The last Unicorn RPG was a as Last Unicorn often did, released as crippleware, except that Last Unicorn then immediately got bought out by Wizards of the Coast, who sank the whole project. So we never got into the supporting material that you really needed to make the game work. That was a thing that Last Unicorn was known for. So, all right, we're moving fast here. We're moving fast. Actually, we're moving super slow. I'm trying to catch up. So, this is Alicia Rowan Witt credited as, and she's been in all kinds of other stuff, and was even in The Sopranos for a couple episodes actually. Now, the director's cut of Ridley Scott's Napoleon, which I'm sure talk about this tomorrow. The director's cut of Ridley Scott's Napoleon probably won't fix it, in my opinion. So, all right, we're trying to catch up here, so bear with me. Bear with me. Books that are epics are hard to screenplays, says Perry Sparopoulos. He's obviously correct here. I've got the extended cut of Gettysburg, and it's better than the regular cut. I will tell you that. I mean, it's slow. Like I see why it wasn't like that in a theater. But we Kevin Featherly, we have mentioned this already. Go check that Gilbert Collins video out. Um, he will go through a great number of Napoleonic productions. All right, we'll be getting to the topic. He can be. He can also be very, adorable uncle like too. That's why he's a great actor, right? Oh, last chance for victory. Yeah, actually, this is a good call. Maybe that's one of the examples we will explore. Ian Holm is great in as Napoleon in Time Bandits. Better than Joaquin Phoenix. Um, so I would obviously agree with this. But I'm not even going to try to summarize the enormous historical designers notes that are present in Last Chance for Victory. You can just download those and read those whether you have the game or not. They are absolutely worth your time whether you have the game or not. So, MMP's Grand Takes Command been redone in the new Londa Richmond too. Other than that, it's an interesting interesting late war campaign. Mark Herman loves B5 and BSG. That first season about the I assume we're talking about New Battlestar Galactica here. That first season of New Battlestar Galactica was probably as good as anything else that has ever appeared on television. The second season was also good. The third season was less good, and I think it jumped to maybe it was fourth or fifth season. I don't remember, but it did at one point jump the shark. And I'm going to spoil it for you. So plug your ears if you don't want to hear when it jumped the shark exactly. That's when a bunch of hitherto unforeshadowed characters turned out to be Cylons, and this was discovered when they all simultaneously started singing all along the watchtower. That is not in any way an exaggeration of the actual shark jumping moment. And after that, I checked out. I think I saw the rest of it, but I was checked out of it at that point. I found that let's see. So this is only if you're only watching Box Lightner. It's the acting is fabulous if you watch Londo and Jakar. Both of whom are marvelous actors. Mark Ruggiero, thanks for stopping by. This VUCA, this Red Strike, I'm already super hoarse here. This Red Strike game from VUCA looks, I did not order it. I don't plan to order it. But it looks very impressive. All right, we're catching up. We are woefully off topic, but did you miss the few minutes? We have not yet been on topic. We have not yet gotten to the topic. I told you got me started talking about Dune and you were going to get at least 10 minutes, 10, 20 minutes, and you did. So, all right, I'm moving fast here. Mike Burnett, I more or less agree with this statement. Much more interesting part is uh, the the clone dynasty. Thanks. I think, I think I'll take that as a compliment. I hope. I agree with this too. All right, we are not yet caught up. Damn it. All right, and yeah, again, it's worth your time to read these designers' notes. Again, you can download them from the Gamers Archive, which is now on the MMP site. For Last Chance for Victory. It'll be really interesting reading again, whether you go get the game or not. All right, we are now caught up. So let's get into the actual topic of the evening, which is thesis. I keep saying theme, thesis and or argument in war games. So this is again based on something that I believe Cole Worley had said. The and that's that a good war game, or maybe he said good game, I don't know, should have an argument. And although I don't like the term argument, I think I see what he's getting at here, and I agree that a war game, in particular, I mean, maybe another kind of game too, but we're talking about war games here, should have something that it is saying. Okay, this is a particular strong suit of Dean Essig designs, for example. That Dean always has something that he is saying, either with a system design, and then, in all likelihood, in addition, in an individual game design. Mark says he thinks it's a Frank Chadwick comment, which is also possible. I could easily be misremembering the source of this comment, since I did zero research on this at all. And I agree. I agree. And the more I reflect upon this idea, I feel like the camera needs to come down. The more I reflect upon this idea, the more impressed I am by Dean as a designer, because he always has something to say. Mark always has something to say too, and I think that's important, right? We're not talking about there isn't anything in principle wrong with a designer merely synthesizing the ideas of other designers. However, the resulting game that comes out of that may end up feeling kind of flaccid, because the designer didn't have anything of their own to say. They had issues with some other game, and they designed their own game that purports to fix those issues. And maybe that was successful, and maybe it wasn't. But we are on the second half of the character sheet, so we are making good clipping progress here. These counters, by the way, are really tightly bound into the sheet. And while they are counters that probably some people would complain are too thin nowadays, I don't think they're problematically thin at all. I saw this. Um, excuse me. And I think this is based on a comic or short story that Claudia Christian worked on. It's a supplement or standalone or something like that based on 7th edition Call of Cthulhu. I didn't back this, but I'm like, huh, that's interesting. Very cool. Red Strike is very attractive. Very attractive. Mo from Mo's Game Tables here. Mo, thanks for stopping by. There we go. There we go. We're glad they're decontaminated after several days in the quarantine enforced by the U.S. Postal Service. There is another package right now that is on its way to me via the scenic route. So, um, kind of in the context of this statement that a good war game should have a thesis, and I'm saying thesis because I wrote a lot of theses. Um, um, as part of doing what I did. But the interesting, I would say no. And maybe I'll provide a concrete example of kind of what I mean. If we were to go back, and imagine ourselves in 1977, okay, and this new thing has come out called Squad Leader, and it's at that point just Squad Leader. The comments are coming very fast here. How often do designers bake in some bias? How often does the designer bake in some bias? I mean, the designer has the designer's biases, right? I expect that to be the case. I would be shocked if that's not the case, right? Now, maybe that's not a bias like one side is numerically favored over the other. That's not what I'm trying to say. That may be part of it, but that's not really what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that in some sense, the designer has an opinion. And in effectuating the game design, they are also telling you what their opinion is in the design itself, right? Vuka has not done an ugly game yet, as far as I'm aware. And I agree with this. The argument that designers make, let me put it this way. This is not a thing that was necessarily obvious to me 15, 20, 30 years ago, right? But this is something that I've been thinking about more and more as I sort of noodle around with a nominal design that you'll eventually hear some more about in the fullness of time. So with me and Hewlett, who also we're talking about David Hewlett, who was Rodney McKay on Stargate Atlantis, which I didn't watch much of, to be honest. Yeah, I didn't know he had a YouTube channel or any of this. So, all right, Mark. Well, I'm shocked, Mark, to be honest, but by which I mean not shocked at all. But that's awesome, though, isn't it? But so a game like it's 1997 and Squad Leader has just come out, right? And I'm not going to try to make the argument that this feature is necessarily new to Squad Leader because I think there are antecedents to it that popped up elsewhere in miniatures, if nothing else. But there's kind of a paradigm shifting thing that Squad Leader has going on that is part of its at least thesis statement. And that is that, hey, this is a World War II tactical game. The counters are squads, and you don't necessarily have complete or perfect control over those squads, right? That again, I don't know that that's the first place this idea popped up. I kind of doubt that it is, but at the same time, it's very likely to be this first place a lot of players encountered it, especially if they weren't playing those particular miniatures games. Mark says that all designers have some bias, hopefully based on research. That was the SPI way. Yeah, I mean, exactly. You're going to be biased by your sources, if nothing else, right? If you just can't find a source that that differ, it's probably a situation that comes up where you have only looked at sources that share some particular facet of point of view. Let me put it that way. So, and we continue to see a large number of hypothetical World War III games, and I am in no way bemoaning the number of hypothetical World War III games. In fact, I would like to see more of them so that I could spend less money. So, and I want to make sure that the chat's okay here. The and again, I don't even necessarily mean that facetiously. I could buy fewer games, that'd be fine. All right, Perfidious Albion says that most war games are recreations of historical events. Where the thesis comes in is how the system treats it and how the players will utilize the tools at hand to perhaps recreate or do better. So, yes. However, let's think a little harder about how that's happening in this case, right? Let's say that our thesis statement is about the Battle of Waterloo. Okay, a designer is gonna presumably read a bunch of books on the Battle of Waterloo and other books that maybe don't directly deal with Waterloo, but are connected to it in some way, like that medical journal paper that I cited one time about Napoleon's hemorrhoids. That was a fun citation. Um, so they're going to have an opinion, right? And that opinion is going to include the dynamics of the deciding factors in that battle. All right. I guess Waterloo is particularly germane subject to this particular time. So whether it's from one source or multiple sources or a lifetime of research, you're going to have an opinion. You, the designer, are going to have an opinion about decided, what factors decided that battle. Was it Napoleon's hemorrhoids? Was it Grouchy's failure to keep Blucher on a leash? Was it any number? Was it the British defense at Hougoumont, which held out? I think it can creditably said far longer than anybody had any reasonable expectation. Is it the fact that Napoleon waited until the ground was starting to dry out to start the battle? which certainly had an effect on the timing of when the Prussians were going to show up around that time anyway. But the battle might have been over by the time the Prussians showed up. Had Napoleon gone a couple hours earlier and damn the weather, or maybe that was just a deal breaker, you know. So there's a whole bunch of things, and how are those things modeled in your game system? Which of and to what extent are is your model of that informing the gameplay of the game, right? And that's what I mean by thesis, right? The designer has an opinion and is building it into the game. All right, Mark says, read Edward Call. Are all historians have to have bias as to what constitutes primary source research is what the person who wrote it thought was important, not all it incurred. Yeah, so the primary sources are all biased too, and we got a lot of that doing ancient history. Let me tell you, where a lot of times there'll only be one source for a particular thing. You might be stuck with Levy or Cassius Dio or whoever you got, right? Otherwise you're looking outside of written sources into archaeology and stuff like that. This is probably both in effect, but I'm really only talking about the opinion on the conflict insofar as it has an impact on the game. So Mark is wise once again. This is true too. This is part of the thesis of Squad Leader. What's the thesis? What's John Prados trying to tell us in Third Reich, for example? John Prados is trying to tell us that the underpinnings of what drove the conduct of the war, not necessarily the causes, but the conduct of the war were fundamentally economic. Okay. Now you can argue that maybe that's not a very good model of the economics of it. That's an argument you can have, but it's definitely fundamentally at the base of that game lies that BRP system. Okay. Well, so I'm not really inclined to argue with this point. What I'm saying is let me put it this way. If you were designing a tactical World War II game or modern or whatever period you want, and this is your position, you are going to build it this way. Okay. And another designer with a different opinion would build it a different way. Now, I'm not particularly inclined to jump out in front of a train in the defense of the squad leader model, which has a lot of issues, right? So, Deets Foundation put out Maneuver Warfare on pre-order today. Modern near future hypothetical battles where you build your force capabilities in a card deck, not expensive. Okay. Check it out if that sounds interesting to you. It truthfully does not sound interesting to me. But bear in mind, I'm a snob with a limited attention span and limited time and money, so I have to be more choosy than maybe a lot of other people necessarily would. And that is just not one of my hot button spaces. No, the point is that it's going to be in there regardless, right? You are going to rely when you are building your tactical game. Um, I mean, what one could attempt to build a strictly numerical simulation. Now, there's really no. Oh, I think there have been games that have veered in this direction, but most games do not do this. The games that do, I would say maybe Panzer, but I haven't had enough exposure to say that. The game that rings a bell to me for this is Phoenix Command, which is an RPG. I think this sort of modern RPG with all kinds of statistical modeling in the combat system, where you're modeling impact and bullet penetration and different types of armor versus different types of projectiles, and it's generally considered to be not incredibly playable. You could design a computer simulation, but even then the simulation is just that, a simulation. The map is not the territory, right? The simulation is going to get some stuff. What the hell is this? Okay, very good. The simulation is going to get some stuff wrong, right? And we see this now in say astrophysics, where you'll have, oh, so and so have simulated the universe on this supercomputer, and it didn't come out anything like what our universe looks like. So no, I think this is just as true with a tactical game. Now the details are going to be different, right? The it's probably easier to do that kind of strictly numerical quantitative modeling with tactical because you can more easily quantify, gun calibers and that kind of stuff. Um, Versus firepower and that kind of thing, and at higher levels, as you go into higher levels, um sort of a chaos theory effect is going to happen, and the model will become too complicated for anything to actually run, much less a human playing at a table here. So Brand says that being able to explore different designers' arguments or focal points to their games is one reason why having blah 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 blah, blah number games on Waterloo, Gettysburg, the Village, Stalingrad, etc. Brand, there aren't that many games on Stalingrad. There's a lot of games that have Stalingrad in the title that aren't about Stalingrad. Now it's not necessarily a small number either, but I'm in this case just kind of making fun. But yeah, this is totally a reason why. This is why I have 3 different versions of Cedar Mountain, right? Because I want to see what the different designers have to say about how that ought to work. Or in Richard Berg's case, 2 designers because he designed 2 of them. So Mark says that for someone to believe that a war game is biased just indicates that they have a different, not necessarily correct or incorrect bias. So what I am saying here, and I don't know that what I'm saying is incompatible with what Mark is saying, is that the designer has a bias, and I have a bias, and you have a bias, and we're all biased, and let's recognize that there are biases, and we just think about what the designer's point of view is. Well, sometimes this is what you got, man. Again, you want to do a game about Maximinus Thrax, right? Good luck. There's like one source on the guy, so that really tells you anything. Thucydides has joined the chat, says Jason W. Well, this is, I mean, I would assume. Well, I mean, it's not like John Butterfield doesn't know who Joe Balkonsky is. So I find this believable on the face of it. David says that he thinks Butterfield based D-Day at Omaha Beach on Balkonsky's book that made the argument that success hinged on the troops that landed away from the draws and made their way up the bluffs. I actually have this book and I have not read it, so I cannot comment on that. Detested opinion, or I mean, you could be making, so we shouldn't necessarily think of this thesis as the designer is trying to like badger us into accepting their point of view, right? That just has they have an opinion, that's all. Andrew Detterer says asks about games with a massive number of random events, say Kingmaker. Lots of games like this, when a major part of the game is carrying basic strategy through events. So I think there's a design thesis in here too, right? But maybe that thesis is that the pattern of narrative that the game models is fundamentally unpredictable. Okay, and through the interaction of those different random events happening in a randomized order each game, one can try to model that unpredictability. We've got Thucydides and Herodotus are getting shout outs now. Achilles is upset that Homer has not been mentioned. Actually, a hypothetical conflict is a great example here because, by definition, the designer of a hypothetical game has an opinion about the hypothetical conflict because we can't look back at history and look at what happened, right? It's hypothetical. We're reconstructing what could potentially have happened after the fact. Are you using current thoughts about how that would play out? Another great example is the Third World War, which is a masterful game. Frank Chadwick design, recently redone by Compass, and kind of built into this thesis of not the original game, but the reprint, is that the design theses, the underlying orders of battle and research and all that was sufficiently at least valid even today in 2020 or whatever it was when the game came out. And so they did not update that stuff. Right? So, buy water. Brian Sallower, welcome to the show. Bias is always hard to address. The Iron Brigade wasn't the Iron Brigade before they fought at Antietam, so a game on Antietam shouldn't really give them a higher combat value. I think Dean Essig might disagree based on the design philosophy expressed in, for example, and elsewhere as well, Last Chance for Victory, where he's not trying to necessarily give a given unit or commander or whatever some kind of absolute rating to reflect how good he thinks they were. He's rating them based on how well they did there. So if a unit is at Antietam, for example, like for instance the Iron Brigade, maybe you should rate them as based on the way they performed there, right? Same deal with, I mean, you could make this argument about yeah, maybe it's, and if you don't model it, maybe it's a different unit that comes through in that way, but then your game system has to allow for that, right? John C says that one thing he picked up from For the People is that the Civil War hinged a lot more on the rivers than what is normally acknowledged. Oh, I completely agree with that statement. But the Mississippi in particular, but the major tributaries of the Mississippi as well. Jonathan Dyer says one of his history lectures wrote his MA about a priest confessor to the Pope, citing dozens of secondary sources. Researching his PhD, he's got MA about a pre. Oh, okay. I get. I believe I get the narrative here. So, upon further research, he discovered the guy wasn't even in Italy at the time. That might be particularly awkward when explaining that to your doctoral advisor. All right. So Kyle Harris points out that plenty of tactical games are built around the idea that one side could have done differently with the same resources. This is probably not even plenty, probably most. Um, I mean, you're going to have to give the player some agency too, right? Unless you're just going to run it as a strictly numerical model, which again, the Department of Defense might do, but it's not something we do in hobby wargaming. All right, so here we go. Wellington's Victory, which I haven't played, and which uh, I am increasingly intrigued in the idea of playing based on having seen and had some explanation about Winter's Victory. I am pretty impressed with what I see out of Winter's Victory, and I'm curious to see how closely it matches the Wellington's Victory system. I mean, we know they did some different stuff with skirmishers and some other things, but I'm very curious to see how that shakes out, and makes me very tempted to play Wellington's Victory. Now I can cheat and just play Quatre Bras instead. Ney versus Wellington is Quatre Bras using the Wellington's Victory system. Um, excuse me. Merck points out that ASL is an immersive design, but any tactical game without real fog of war is what Dunnigan called Panzer chess. So, well, most non-refereed hobby war games are going to feature an unsatisfying model of fog of war. ASL does some things with it. There are concealment markers, for example, that can be added to stacks of markers. You can have dummies, or you can they can be removed from stacks of counters. So that's something that gives you some level of fog of war. Whether it is a satisfying level is up to you. There are also outright hidden units where you actually write the hexes down and what's in them. And then those are revealed whenever you choose to reveal them, or when units come within so many hexes or whatever. So there's that too. And that's, again, another not entirely satisfactory model of fog of war. But I mean, insofar as any game should have some way to reflect fog of war, I think that's clearly true. I think a lot of games don't try very hard to do it, and I will include in that category a decent number of games that I like very much. Alan Salazar asked if any of the Waterloo titles out there take account of the wet ground theory when the weather delays battle and impacts Artillery effectiveness. The Labatt might, at least in if you play it with the regs rules, which is the most complicated rule set, because that does have rules for like bouncing cannonballs and stuff like that, and that might be affected by the wet ground. And I mean, certainly, I think to some extent, I think you can more easily rationalize. That's what it is, a rationalization. Though, of the lack of a fog of war in like a strategic level game where there's a great deal left up to abstraction. When I'm playing World in Flames, for example, yeah, there's some things I don't know about the enemy displacement, but based on the unit scale and the map scale, and would I reasonably know that there's roughly 3 cores in this particular hex? Yeah, I probably would. So I think that's reasonable. On the other hand, we've got OCS style, very simple fog of war rules. You can't expect the opposing side stacks, and leaves it at that. And I actually find that to be a lot more effective than not perfectly satisfying, but a lot more effective than you would think. But a lot of that's kind of based on the numerical model behind OCS, right? Because you're going to end up making, over the course of the game, you're going to end up making a lot of rolls, and those things will kind of shake out at the end. Both ways, right? Where you've got I think I'm going to throw 4 infantry divisions and blow 4 supply attacking this hex, and he turns out he's got a battalion in it, and you just overwhelm it and have spent all that supply. Versus, I have penetrated the Soviet line and I'm going to jump on this artillery unit. I don't know whatever else is under it. That's not it. Oh shit, it's a tank corps. So it can work out both ways. Board games often designs to impart a theme and be enjoyable first. How much history versus abstraction can vary? So this came up in a discussion of Ridley Scott's Napoleon, actually, but it's a fair point. If your game is just fundamentally unenjoyable to play, it doesn't really matter how sophisticated your model is. If your game nobody likes to play it, then the all the research and all that other stuff is really kind of insignificant, right? Because nobody wants to play it. And maybe there's people that are going to buy it and study it and not play it, but and that's fine too. And if that is satisfying, then good for you. But I mean, a lot of folks will not find that satisfying. Daniel McCord says, "Has a board game ever changed someone's bias?" I'm not sure this is what you're asking, but I would bet a paycheck that play of a war game has in fact changed the previous bias of one of the war gamers who played it. I would guarantee that. Now, from a design standpoint, maybe not, but maybe, right. One can build models and test them, and this doesn't work. This doesn't reflect the history. This doesn't work. This doesn't reflect the history. Change it again. This does. Oh, this does work. This does give me plausible historical results. So maybe these new factors that I'm considering that I wasn't considering before have changed my mind about that. Now, I don't know that I've ever seen a designer say that. I don't know that I haven't, but I wouldn't be surprised. That seems like a reasonable thought process to go through, right? Cards do not bother me at all, but I'm not the world's biggest fan of card games in wargaming. If they're straight card games, there is enormous cognitive load that can be relieved by putting some stuff on cards. That doesn't necessarily extend all the way to card driven game, right? You can have the the special action cards of US Civil War, or the option cards of Total Krieg, and you're loading a lot of the detail that you would otherwise want to build into the rules, or have to build into the rules maybe, onto those cards. All right, we're gonna do fast motion, fast forward here through the chat. So, well, and here's Stigler saying that playing Red Badge of Courage's first Manassas changed how he saw that battle. And I find this completely believable. Whether that's happened to me, yeah, I believe it has happened to me actually. Civil War topics, the Battle of the Bulge. I've changed my mind about some of the dynamics of those situations based on that, based on actual gameplay and seeing a couple different implementations in action. Mark says that the goal is to design a game that represents the historical context, decisions, and what were the asymmetries or lack thereof. Yes, but the details of those are going to vary, of course, by designer, right? Mark, you're not going to design the same game on the Bulge that Danny Parker would, right? Um, I'm not going to design the same strategic level World War II game that Harry Rowland would. So that's a that I guess one can think of that as designer bias, but maybe that's too strong. Maybe we say that that's just the designer has an opinion about how this stuff is going to work. Thomas Prowl, who is the lead main man over on the Axis Empires Ultimate Edition, says that World War II was fundamentally unpredictable to the participants, so random events are important in that design. Yeah, and that's modeled in a couple of different ways. One is on the location tables that sometimes used when you trigger an action. There's the fortunes of, I think they're called fortunes of war cards. We haven't touched those yet, which are sort of a randomized. It's a deck of cards. There's about 30 of them, and it's basically random events. They are cards that you shuffle on like the rest of the cards in the game. So I would sleeve those. And you don't get a ton of them in any given game, but there's an option in there that says, hey, if you want more, use more. But I think by default, you're going to end up playing per set of maps. So on the Total Krieg maps, you'll end up playing about potentially three per faction in a game. And same thing on the Dice Senso maps. And Mark mentions that the next war saw that a Soviet attack would fail, something that seems to be the opinion after the Cold War ended. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that's based on witchcraft, and because Mark did this in 1980, something like that, 1978, versus now where that's more obvious because we've got access to some of that information that we didn't have in 1978, 1980. Zaloga makes the argument, says Jeff Beeler, that the Bulge attack failed when the 12th SS failed to capture Elsenborn Ridge and exploit to the Meuse at Liège. Um, I'd have to read the book because this to pin it all on that one failure seems unreasonable to me, but I'm not sure that that's the argument. I mean that's important, but there's other failures that happened in that advance as well. There you go. John C has determined based on play of Empire of the Sun that the Philippines are better left to the Japanese. Mark Hodgkinson mentions that I think some of us liked unconditional surrender mechanisms, but not the thesis because we are used to the Third Reich economic model. So, what is the thesis of? I have not put any thought into unconditional surrender specifically, and I haven't played it in a while. I think it's a very good game. I don't like certain aspects of it, but I mean, all these games have their issues, right? Um, what is the thesis of unconditional surrender? Well, what I can see offhand is that Sal in that game is making the argument that different kinds of warfare at that level that the game depicts, right, which is a pretty high strategic level, are similar enough. Air warfare, naval warfare, land warfare, strategic warfare are similar enough that they can be resolved using the same mechanism. Now, that's a somewhat meta thesis. If that's it, I suspect that's not it. I think that's probably not all Sal Vasta, the designer, had to say in unconditional surrender. El Harris asked if there's any games that purposely game out bad historic interpretations as a way to show that they are bad historic interpretations. I have seen this. I'm not sure I could think of an example at the moment because I've got a lot of games in my head at the moment. We are incidentally playing. In fact, I went direct from Ridley Scott's made-for-TV movie Napoleon to playing Napoleon's Last Gamble, which was probably the only reason that I did not drive the car off of a highway overpass on the way home that night. Oh, geez, Alistair Logie. It took me as an example of the post-COVID brain fog that I am experiencing. It took me at least 6 seconds to get what you were saying here, and it is actually funny. So, so the in Axis empires. So there'll be some video coming about this. So we've done a full playthrough of the dice of decision part of it, which is the basically starts at the beginning of World War One and ends when the game starts in 1937. We've done that, and we had a pretty weird alternate history, right? In a I really like the implementation of the way the results of those tables are done because they kind of they're specific enough that you can just say, okay, this is the mechanical effect, boom, we're done, we're good. Or you can create a fairly elaborate alternate history about it based on what you saw there. In ours, for maybe I shouldn't spoil it, but in ours, you're going to see us pulling all kinds of stuff out to put this alternate history together. So, all right, Frank Davis says that thesis simply means limiting your design focus to answer a particular question that interests you. For example, did the difficult Ardennes terrain defeat the German offensive from succeeding? I think Danny might be making that argument in the last gamble, for example, since terrain and movement are modeled in a really detailed way there. I think that's reasonably true. Um, or I think one can that's a reasonable interpretation of what I've seen of Danny's design so far. Let me say it that way. I think it's important for a design to avoid scope creep. And I mean something slightly different than what I typically say when I see scale creep, where a game can kind of say, "Oh, we're at this scale," but then we're going to kind of drift up and down in the course of various mechanics as the game gets played. Scope creep, from the standpoint that Frank is talking about here, I think means that pick what your game is about and then make design the game to be about that rather than necessarily trying to model every little other factor that may or may not be important based on what you're really interested in that inform your design decision to do it in the first place. Mark says that ratings have to be considered within the context of the entire system. Comparing two numbers is usually not going to be an apples to apples consideration. I mean, yeah, definitely. Well, let me elaborate though, or and maybe this will turn into a follow-up question as I continue to say it out loud. Um, is one concerned with compatibility of numerical scale between different games in the same system, right? I don't think I am ever going to say, let's, what would be a good example here? There's weird noises happening out here. Um, let's say that Stonewall Jackson survives to at least to July of 1863, and therefore he is present at Gettysburg. Okay, well, if I have a Gettysburg game that doesn't give me that a historical option, I could, in principle, take if the game also models if there's another game in that system that also models Chancellorsville, I can just take the Stonewall Jackson counter from Chancellorsville, stick it in the Gettysburg game, and try and reconstruct the Jackson's original division from Chancellorsville. One could do that, but I would be very leery of that actually working because Jackson's rating in the Chancellorsville game is going to be context dependent on how things played out at Chancellorsville. The assumptions might be very different at a Gettysburg, and this is one reason why Dean says that Longstreet's rate relatively low rating in Last Chance for Victory is warranted because he feels that that's indicative of Longstreet's performance at the actual battle, right? Um, now, what one can disagree with Dean's opinion on that, right? And that doesn't necessarily negate that the game's good. It's just that's how Dean went at the problem, right? All right. Yeah, so would Monty, Colin Flanagan. Thanks for stopping by. Um, it was a necessity for MacArthur. Let me put it that way. Thomas says that Dean's ratings and Dave Powell's have always been specific to the event being simulated. Yes, exactly. Longstreet can be a 4 at Second Manassas and 0 at Seven Pines. Yes, exactly. So where you're like missing and matching, maybe you're creating problems for yourself. And maybe if it's a game that you can play in 2 or 3 hours anyway, maybe that's worth doing just for the fun of it, just to see. But I would be concerned at the fidelity of trying to state that the same numbers would necessarily carry over from game to game, right? Stigler says that the Iron Brigade won its name at Brawner's Farm at Second Manassas, so the brigade needs to have its ultra high rating for that battle, as well as at Antietam, where they suffered greatly. So yes, but again, you're going. uh, Okay, so not every designer is going to set a bespoke value for each individual unit, whatever scale that unit is at. There is a criticism that we make of some games sometimes that it has cookie cutter units, right? Where all the units are basically the same. All right. And while that's fine, and it might even be preferable depending on scale, if you zoom way out, right? I mean, in unconditional surrender, for example, all the units, there isn't even factors on the counters. There is a factor that's built into the table that's a national DRM, and that's it. A German unit is a German unit, and that's that. Um, to the best of my recollection, anyway. So Kevin Featherly says there's a bias in the very choice of subject. If I were to design a game that included the first Minnesota, my aunt, what they did would be hard to ignore. Well, yes, but what game are you designing, right? Are you designing a little round top game? In which case, you have to the ratings that you assign first Minnesota needs to reflect what they did within the context of your mechanical system, needs to reflect what they did at Little Round Top, right? On the other hand, let's say that you are designing a regimental scale game on the American Civil War that covers, 1862 to 1863. It's a little harder to justify that first Minnesota that spectacularly good first Minnesota rating, right? Instead, what you would need to do is well, you have to figure it out somehow. I can think of a number of different ways to do that, either with some kind of special throwaway elite units modifier or chit. You could have units graduate to veteran status somehow. Although I don't know much about the prior history of the first Minnesota specifically. So, Drew Jetterer, unknown strength units of PGG and a bunch of other games read a thesis about one side at least. Even their commanders didn't know what they would do. Yeah, nobody knows. That's the interesting thing about that. And some of that is inherited by the new Battles in the East system as well. We're getting a little bit of squeak on the clipper tonight. Earl says that he feels that the unknown strength in PGG was due to the big gaps in research sources for the Red Army in World War II when the game was designed. I would be very interested in finding out to what extent that was a factor. I find this completely believable. But if so, did they not stumble across a really interesting way to handle fog of war too? If that's the case, 1914 Hell Unleashed. This is a thing I am not familiar with. Yes, Brant did do a bunch of stuff on Fog of War over at the Armchair Dragoon set. Very hard to do in hobby games because so much of the real Fog of War is cleared up as soon as you open the box. I mean, yeah, because you can see what the units are, right? There's a game. Well, what game was this? I think it's Goss, actually, that actually has a rule that says not only are you not allowed to inspect other sides stacks, you are not allowed to read their order of arrival or initial setup. Now, that's kind of unreasonable. I think. To expect some, I mean, and even so, well, what if you played the game 10 times? They're just going to know basically who's where and who comes in when. So you can't really just have a prohibition on that. I think that's silly. Not the smartest moment in the Goss rulebook. Let me put it that way. As Mark is writing in his soon to be published book, which we're going to talk about that very soon, strategic games are closer simulations to what he experienced in the Pentagon during two actual wars. And this makes sense, right? Because it's the Pentagon, right? Their object is to explore strategic options. Whereas you descend down the scales to tactical, the simulation value becomes more tenuous. First person shooters are used in the military for training. I wonder about the efficacy of that. Um, I wonder about the efficacy of that, because obviously, playing a first-person shooter is not going to give you training on what it feels like to get shot. And it might concede, and I don't know that this is the case. I'm just talking. Um, does it lead you to behave recklessly in actual combat? Because after all, you didn't get shot in the first-person shooter. I don't know. So, Thomas, we are going to be reaching out to Mark for an appearance. Hopefully, Mark, this will work out for you. But we're looking like hopefully the 21st will work for you. Let me put it that way. And if not, we'll make it work at a different time where we could talk about Mark's book. So, and yes, we will all would like to know where we can get it. So, interestingly, I didn't see Brant's original comment that sparked this, Mo. Um, the Labatai, at least the premier rules, and I think one of the older versions of the rules may do this as well. Um, those rules actually have a timer built in. And that is, as they have explained it, that is intended to be their command control mechanism. You are going to kind of decide on your priorities for stuff that you got to move in the 8 minutes or whatever it is you've got to move all your stuff. And when you're out of time, you're out of time, and that's that, right? So yes, that could be. Mark, we just got to get you in. Like I said, we got a guest for this week and next week, and if and you are first on our list after that. So we would love to talk about that. This is a very Mark has heard of this book, of course. This is a very famous book, actually. Monopoly was originally designed, remember, as an anti-capitalist object lesson. Now, I don't recall. There's videos about this. Exactly what got changed in on its road to being a mass market favorite, but it was originally designed in that way. So, ooh, that's interesting. I did not necessarily realize this particular timeline was the case. That's very interesting. Maybe Hackett is in fact uh, taking cues from Mark. There's a lot of really high quality discussion here in the chat here, folks, tonight. Marxist cards bring uncertainty, and that's a good thing. Yes, absolutely. There's a randomness there. Can Lincoln get McClellan to move? Often he could not. That's because he was outnumbered all the time, every day. I do think it's a little easy to just blame bad intel on McClellan's timidity on the battlefield as well. Oh, Cal Harris says Andre Richmond changed his view of the Peninsular Campaign. McClellan wasn't exactly wrong or stupid. So this is where McClellan is maneuvering in a way that makes a lot of sense were he actually outnumbered, right? And let's also not forget Malvern Hill, right? This is where I am no staunch defender of McClellan, okay? But Malvern Hill is where McClellan faces off against Robert E. Lee on the battlefield and beats him. And that's worth something, right? Because whatever else you want to say about Robert E. Lee, he was pretty good. So an analysis of McClellan is going to necessarily be very complicated. And I don't know that I'm. I think there's several good books about it. I can tell you that. Stephen Sears has written one. I forget what the title is because I've got most of his Civil War stuff. Well, maybe. Well, I don't know, Mark. But in any case, Danny's got opinions on what the dynamics of the battle were, and so do you. They would be. What I'm trying to say is they'd be different. Mark says next war was in '78. All Bulge games will see the Germans lose. It's just fun to see it happen, and fun to see if the Germans. So it's one of the reasons why I think there's a lot of reasons why the Bulge remains enduringly popular. One is that it is the quintessential American value battle on the West Front of World War II, right? As much as our good old buddy Montgomery wanted to claim credit for it in its immediate aftermath, even he had to walk that back. So it's kind of the quintessential American battle where the Americans came upon what was perceived at the time with some justification as the full might of the this veteran German army, which ended up stalling and getting rolled back. Okay, so there's like the American cultural zeitgeist is attached to the Bulge, all right, which in a pretty understandable. It's also a pretty good situation just as a pure war game, right? Because you have a built-in timer because the Americans start completely on the back foot. They have stuff coming in though, and the Germans have stuff coming in, but they have a lot less coming in. So the Germans are on the clock, right? The Germans must make a certain amount of progress in a certain amount of time, or they're going to end up losing, right? That's predetermined. So it has a kind of a built-in victory condition. Can you do better than the Germans did historically, right? Which we did in I think in our Wacht am Rhein game earlier this year. Well, yeah. To be honest, Jiggler, yeah, probably. I don't know any of those, however. All right, Brant, thanks for stopping by. So Mark says that Sal's argument is entropy unifies all forms of combat, not a bad thesis. Okay, I mean there you go. If that's I have given insufficient thought to putting it exactly that way, but that's very interesting. Carl Creator from the Wargame Bootcamp. It is 6:30 p.m. over there in California, so this is about dinner time, about sensible dinner time. Yeah, it's going to be. I think we're going to break it into 2 or 3 episodes. We'll see. We've got two different large chunks of video right now. I want to try and make it a lot less hemming and hawing and us looking through the rule book. So it's going to take some time to edit. So don't count on it soon. There's another piece of I'll try and mention this. I meant to mention this in the general update section of the show at the beginning, and I forgot about it because it wasn't written down. It is my intention to take a week off this year, off of everything, off of work, off the channel, off of gaming. That is the week between Christmas and New Year's, so there will not be a show, shockingly, on December 25th. There may be some recorded content that gets released that week. I'll try and plan for that. But I would like to. I simply do not ever just take time off, right? If I took time off, I'm going to a convention or we're going somewhere or something like that. So I'm just taking friggin' time off. So FYI, the week between Christmas and New Year's, we will be back on January 1st, which is the following Monday. So yes, this looks super interesting. And I mean, the folks who are playing it, which include like Bruno, that's like, geez, okay. If Bruno says this works, then okay. Is thesis even possible? Well, if the thesis can be conjecture, I mean, you can have a conjectural thesis, right? I see no fundamental problem with that. Scale Creep is, in Cal Harris's opinion, what scuttled Rick Barber's Gettysburg game, which is Summer Storm, which is beautiful. Great game, but the operational element tied to the tactical element was turgid. Is it turgid or turgid? The expansion with the new map is wonderful. Are we talking about Summer Storm here? No. The Devils to Pay is the expansion. The Devils to Pay is the I'm it's been a bit of a long month. So if we're talking about not that a most fearful sacrifice, it's I don't know if a most fearful sacrifice it was Rick Barber's greatest piece of artwork, but I do think it's the greatest implementation of Rick Barber artwork in a war game box, and that's because it's bigger. It is so much easier to see all that loving detail on that Most Fearful Sacrifice map than it is on a typical Rick Barber map that you get in the war game box, which is more a statement about the printing rather than the art, right? All right. So John Madison says that scaling carries more weight in system series games where one game has Panzer ones and another game using the same rules has Pershings in it. Does it? I mean, it can if those games are fundamentally designed to be linkable, but they need not be just because they're in the same system. So I am probably just as unlikely to say, all right, I am going to, in my Beyond the Rhine game, I'm going to pull these 1942 kind of peak German panzer divisions and just throw them in my Beyond the Rhine game and see what happens. I'd have just as much faith in that as putting Stonewall Jackson out of a different game at Gettysburg, right? Um, Now, on the other hand, if those games are designed to be linked, then that's different. And then, yeah, you do have to consider that. I think this is probably true too, but this is beside the point I was making. Oh, yeah. So another good example, actually. Yes. Stonewall's Sword, which is Cedar Mountain, which is one of my Cedar Mountain games. I think I have at least three Cedar Mountain games. Has his chit as pretty weak because of how he performed historically there, right? And let's also, consider that while Stonewall Jackson's performance was sometimes brilliant, he was also pretty erratic. So all right, Marty says that he thinks our Dens 44 has a thesis that allows that terrain was a huge factor in slowing the German offensive. Yeah. Um, I mean, I feel like there's more to Simonich's opinion than that because I think that's really obvious, right? That the terrain is a big factor. That they're going to be extremely their advance and their rate of advance and their ability to project forward is going to be highly dependent on the roads and the condition of the roads and their control of the roads and their control and condition of bridges. So yes, I think that's really obvious. Which maybe you don't need more than that. Maybe that's fine. I'd say I'd have to think about this a little harder, but probably it's APO rather than Yule. I think Ardennes 44 has a thesis of a German auto victory taking Liège. This might be the case. I've never seen that. I've only played it once, to be fair. So, does this happen often? Because if it happens often, then it's probably an issue. So why John Keyports wants more innovation in the variable combat systems. You don't know how a unit will perform initially, but once committed, you get an idea of how they do. You get different heroes. There are games. The Fall of the Third Reich behind me from Compass and designer Ted Racer is an example of a game in which not only are the unit strengths random, they're always random. You determine the unit effectiveness when they fight, and then the next time they fight, you roll again on the same table, and it could be different. So you don't know. All right, so there we go. Mark Herman says that PGG used a variable strengths as it was an interesting idea that worked. And yeah, I mean that's been a super influential idea over the course of the last 40 or so years in Wargame or however many. I'm not doing math at this hour. You people crazy. Has there ever been a wargame where a counter's size is visible, but their effectiveness is only revealed after first contact? I do think that counters. So if you think about the different ways information can be presented on counters, right, with numbers or symbols or colors, right, one of the unexplored ways to have information displayed on counters is the counter size. Okay. There's not many games that do this. The obvious one that does is the Frank Chadwick Thunder in the East game that is now available from GMT, where you've got small, medium, and large ground combat units. And there are literally small, medium, and large ground combat units. The small units are about a division, the medium units are about a corps, and the large units are about an army. So, and that's an interesting idea. It kind of makes stacking a bit of a pain in the ass, but there's that. What if World War One was refought using good generals? There you go. Now we're talking about alternate history, John. Though I'm just saying. All right. Yes, exactly. Might maybe some bad habits in there. No, yeah, and I mean, like I said, I mean, you do want to maximize playability and engagement with the game too, right? I mean, I'm all for historicity and maximizing historicity where possible, but fundamentally, the game's got to be fun to play, or nobody's going to play it. I would be, man, if something like this, I'd be looking for an ebook copy personally, and I have no idea. I have not looked into that. All right, Thomas Powell remembers Dave Powell saying after he finishes 7 days, CWB Design, which is a 3-volume series, by the way. I've only got one of them. Saying that McClellan was right, Lee outnumbered him. I'd have to look at that. And the Pinkertons, there's that. There you go. Melvin Hill played the Union asymmetry and artillery. Yeah, but we give Lee credit for winning all these battles, and sometimes he wasn't the deciding. Often, in fact, he wasn't necessarily the deciding factor. So if we're going to do that with Lee, we can at least give this one to McClellan, right? Doug, thanks for stopping by. Mentions that Lee lost every engagement of the 7 days, and the ones that he won, he took more significantly more casualties than the Union did, right? So these were costly victories too. Yeah, I mean, and this is one of those things that make make an analysis of McClellan difficult. Not necessarily difficult. Well, no, difficult I think is an appropriate word. But you've got to really get into the weeds here, right? What kind of intel was he getting? Was like the Pinkerton numbers obviously bullshit, or did he just that he just chose to believe? In what situations was he being fed that kind of information? I don't think bad intel is not the whole story there, right? That's what I'm saying. Oh, this is an interesting idea. Drew Jetter asked if anybody's done a thesis on the German army's use of Kampfgruppen, where they're because this is how it worked, right? They pull units from here and pull units from there, and put this comp group together and said, okay, here's your mission, your comp group such and such, whoever's in charge, off you go. Well, what about the units that they pulled their strength from, right? Offhand, I don't know if I'd go so far as to call this a thesis. I think, if anything, the thesis of this particular game, Gary Grigsby's War in the East 2, is let's have so much detail that no human mind can encompass it. Um, it would exactly work exactly this way. You could put these single unit stacks together that contain like a large number of assets pulled from other units. You'd then be weakening those units, right? So Thomas Brown says that McClellan wouldn't be able to win the war, but probably wouldn't lose it. To win it took a Grant. Yeah, I think that's true, and that's why Lincoln knew he had a good thing when Grant came along. To the Gates of Richmond is Stephen W. Sears' book on the Peninsula Campaign. I have not read it yet. I do have it. In a sense, this is well, okay. So then McClellan, yeah, I suppose so, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure this is a really great selling point in McClellan's favor either here, right? So the Lee's and this is amateur hour, armchair historian talking here, right? It's Lee is a very aggressive commander, in part because he wants a Napoleonic decisive victory, right? And he believes that you need to be aggressive in order to accomplish that, as Napoleon was, right? He was literally a member of the Napoleon Club at West Point. Um, so he may have been right about that, right? That it would have taken a Napoleonic decisive victory for the South to win the war. I think that's another question that requires a deeper analysis than you are going to find on this show here tonight. But as a result, Lee lost a lot of troops in in some cases that were spent to achieve things, and in some cases were simply squandered. So, I mean, you could certainly make the argument that neither of his two invasions, neither his invasion of Maryland nor his invasion of Pennsylvania were actually good ideas. But Lee's trying to force a decisive battle, and it was even better if that battle was on northern soil. Yes, Mark, you did post your dice to descent. I've watched that video actually. Thank you for doing that. Would your audience be included in the thesis? That would impact the complexity of the design. It could be. It could be. Let's say you're designing a Gettysburg game for beginners, right? Well, including this like complicated set of assumptions that would go into what decided the battle and what didn't is maybe not appropriate for a design intended for beginners. So I would say, in most cases, the intended audience is going to be war gamers. But if there's a subset there, new war gamers or experienced war gamers or whatever, you may tailor the arguments that you are going to make in the game design based on that intention. Carl's blog over on BGG is, I mean, assuming you have any interest in Order of Battle research or BCS or SCS or TCS, Carl's blog over at BGG is something you should totally be following. Oh, a couple games have done this though, where they've included options for Jackson survives to Gettysburg. So this wasn't the only one. But Summer Storm is Rick Barber's design too, right? And that's kind of why it's as interesting as it is, because you're talking about a fella who lived and breathed the Gettysburg battlefield, right? So that's completely believable. All right, we're working on it here. So I'd need to explore this idea a little more because presumably this is correct, but I don't know exactly how that fits in, right? Is he saying that the abstraction of placing a unit in a single hex is he being specific enough in exploring that abstraction to say that it really kind of includes about half the adjacent hex too, right? Thus, the Zoc bond it represents physical presence of units or ability to project firepower or whatever it is. So MS Gaming, John, thanks for stopping by. Says that Ardennes 44 is all about American artillery kicking ass. Well, this is a completely a suitable theme for an Ardennes game specifically, or really a lot of games in World War II that feature Americans. So I am reasonably sure that PGG predated this. This is basically how it worked in Panzer Group Guderian. But I've never played the Rostov game, so or any of the games from that quad, actually, technically. Mark says that Lee did not win the battles of the 7 days so much. Yeah, this is basically true. I mean, um, in 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 the tactical sense, most of those battles ended up as Union victories. But in the strategic sense, McClellan's retreating back to Harrison's Landing. So it's a win in that sense, and I think there is. I mean, as is so often the case with Robert E. Lee, I think there's a certain favorable light in which he basks, and the stories of his victories reside. Lee put it that way. Alan Salazar mentions Gary Gallagher, which is absolutely something worth looking into. Jackson would have demanded clipping on the units while sucking lemons. That's absolutely right. All right, we are actually so, somewhat shockingly caught up to the chat with 10 minutes to go. This is very good rye whiskey. Um, It's not super rye forward, by the way. If for those who really like rye, which I do, um, I mean, rye is my favorite bread too, and I love German Roggen beer, rye beer, which is a little bit hard to find, but this is true. The This is putting a fabulous image in my head. Let me tell you. So I'll tell you what. The Having gone through Axis Empire's Ultimate Edition, having gone through and organized the counters completely twice now, even though we've only done Dice of Decision so far, really actually helped because somebody would say, okay, well, our, Hatte is, can they become a minor? And I'd be like, nope, they're just, it's just a space. So because there's no counters for them, right? So I was able to answer some questions just based on having gone through the counters thoroughly twice. And that organization did go through a couple different iterations too, where I like got half of it done and then said, this sucks, and redid it. And I managed to get the entire game into 4 counter trays, which I consider an absolute and it's pretty well organized too, by either initial setup or condition, usually a card of entry. So Mark is mentioning that he's wrestling with how to handle the 7 days for Rebel Fury Volume 2. It may be even tougher than Chancellorsville, which was a challenge without special rules. Yeah, so Chancellorsville, I mean, this is one reason why we don't see as many games on Chancellorsville, at least at the tactical level. Although I'm not sure I'm prepared to describe Rebel Fury as tactical. I would let Mark answer that question, but it feels more operational to me. But Chancellorsville, Fredericksburg, obviously, these are battles, Vicksburg even, that are not very often handled by war games, at least at the tactical level. And part of the reason is what seems like a decision space that's really small, or a decision space that you would feel obliged to confine, because that how do you have Fredericksburg without the frontal assaults, right? How do you have the Battle of the Crater without the crater, right? So Mark says it's grand tactical, but he does not object to operational. I think grand tactical is a reason. I mean, from what I've seen so far of the scale and what it looks like, um, that seems like a reasonable classification to me. Yeah, this ends up feeling unsatisfying a lot of the time, right? Some kind of union command paralysis mechanic, and maybe you can gamify that. We are done with this counter sheet, and I think there's 1.5 counter sheets left in this thing. Pretty a lot of games. Um, so the best solution to Fredericksburg specifically is to step back, and then step back again, and then maybe step back a third time until you have an operational game, and then you can turn Fredericksburg into something interesting. There was a great Campaigns of the American Civil War mini module for this in Skirmisher #2 called Burnside Takes Command. And I have the stuff. I haven't played it yet. I was disappointed that this did not make its way into Stonewall Jackson's Way 2, or into maybe this could be a skirmisher add-on, right? Or doing it, well, I guess doing it in a skirmisher again. Because you don't need another map. The map's in Stonewall Jackson's Way 2. So you can just give me the counters and the scenarios, right? So it seems like an easy lift. So, whoa, shit. So Carl says, great comment about scaling back to make one-sided affairs more reasonable. Like, oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, Fredericksburg is a crappy battle at the tactical level because Burnside is an idiot, right? In Burnside's defense, he did tell Lincoln, "Look, I'm an idiot. I'm gonna suck at this." And Lincoln didn't listen, and that we got Fredericksburg out of it. So, and I'm not sure that Burnside's reputation really recovered from that. Kyle says that Skirmisher #2 is my holy grail acquisition. So I managed to get the magazine Skirmishers 1 and 2 without the stuff, without the counters and stuff, relatively inexpensively. And then somebody somewhere, I forget who this was, it may even have been John from Half-Assed Gaming, had an extra set of the counters for skirmisher number 2 that they sent me or I bought or something like that. I forget what the transaction was. And then the extra counters in skirmisher 1 are the replacement counters for the Avalon Hill games in the series to play with the series rules. And I got that counter sheet. It's like a half a counter sheet. I got that from Ken Lee at Winter Offensive. So that was almost worth the trip to Winter Offensive by itself, in addition to all the other terms that I brought. Or Reynolds supporting Meade, yeah. Mark uses a different level of victory conditions, strategic, why they attacked, and generalship, who lost more. Strategic takes priority over generalship. There you go. That's potentially very interesting. Doug says that American Civil War is so unsatisfying to game at the tactical and strategic levels. I don't agree with this statement, but I mean, everybody's got an opinion, right? GCACW highlights the most interesting element of the ACW, and that's operational. Now, that I agree with, but that's because I am a fundamentally operational player. I like operational the best out of all the various scales that you could say. And now you could call that grand tactical or grand operational or low level operation or whatever, as long as it's somewhere in there where I am kind of seeing the maneuver and the logistics and the command constraints. That's where I am happiest as a wargamer. I like strategic stuff too, but I like tactical stuff substantially less than I like strategic stuff. And I don't need any 20th century or later tactical games. I have a few. I've got a couple of World War I ones, and I've got a couple of World War II ones, and I don't need any more. And I certainly don't need any more modern or hypothetical tactical. But you give me Napoleonic tactical, maybe Civil War tactical, Ancients tactical, medieval tactical, maybe, which there's not a ton of, but there's some. Then that's different. I could get into that. Particularly, I think my happiest tactical space is Civil War and Napoleonic, though. More so Napoleonic, I think. Okay, so Gilbert Collins says Daniel McCord said as he got older, he realized the operation was by far more impactful to tactical events rather than the reverse. Lee strikes north versus 3 days of Gettysburg, if that makes sense. So Lee strikes north. Do we mean Lee moves north from SPI, early days SPI? Or are we talking Rose of Gettysburg 2 versus 3 days? Because yeah. Well, yes. I mean, I agree with this certainly, and I mean, I'm probably not incredibly well equipped to have this argument about a lot of topics, but maybe Gettysburg, I can at least dip my toes into it. I mean, you can, and I've said this before, you can look at the roads to Gettysburg map and kind of see that end of Pennsylvania and understand that why the battle took place where, and to some extent how it did, based on the road network and where the crossroads are, huge crossroads in Gettysburg, right? So you can see that. Okay. Circling back, Rick Barber tried to do with yes, with Summer Storm, the Devils to Pay expansion. I think kind of like a split scale like that is really hard to do. There have been successfully anyway. There have been a couple of attempts to do it. There's a sense in which Pacific War does it, but it doesn't do it in terms of map scale or counter scale, only in time scale, where you'll be like performing these operational moves of your naval units, and then there'll be a point at which a decision is made, and you kind of snap into a slightly more higher granularity scale. So Louisiana Tigers, I've heard about this. I would have to check BGG for this, to be honest. Was this was it conflict simulations? This potentially sounds interesting. That early skirmish at First Manassas itself is interesting, actually. I'm not sure how well it games, but it is actually interesting to read that history. There you go. Yeah, that Carl is prolific at it too. I'll point out. So yeah, highly recommended to follow Carl's blog on BGG. It's there might be 2 blogs I follow on BGG, but that's Carl's is the one that I actually read. So, oh, okay. So Lost. Haven't I heard? Maybe there's another game with a similar title. I'm not sure. That sounds interesting, actually. Maybe think about resuscitating that. That might be an interesting thing to take a look at. All right, so we are just about out of time. So let me start to wrap this up. So let me say, first of all, thanks everybody for coming out tonight. If you haven't already, please do remember to like the video and to subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. There are ways to support the channel. Big shout outs to the patrons. There'll be a card here in a minute with the patrons on it. Thank you, patrons. Thank you, new patrons. Thank you, old patrons. Thank you, all the patrons. There's a link to the Patreon in the video description. Your support is greatly appreciated and really does help a lot. It helps me to continue to do a lot of the stuff that I'm able to do here on the channel. So thank you. And thanks everybody for watching, because remember, you are in fact supporting the channel by being here, even more so if you are contributing to the conversation and the community. The chat tonight has been fantastic. I was kind of worried that we'd have some kind of toxic poisoning from some kind of toxic shock syndrome from last Thursday. That didn't happen at all. I am, which doesn't surprise me, but I was dismayed by some of the stuff from the other video. So that didn't happen. So thanks. Everybody knows how to get a hold of me. My email address has been in the video description this whole time. So remember that tomorrow night we will have a chit show special about Ridley Scott's made-for-television movie Napoleon with Dan, and who has, last I talked to him, had not yet seen it, and Jim Ozarski, who is the fussiest Napoleonic nerd I could find to participate in this conversation. So I'm sure Jim has an opinion, a strong opinion. So, and that's going to be great. We're going to have hopefully Fred Sabal on the show, the regular chit show on Thursday, and I will be back next week here. And there should be an unboxing on Thursday too. I don't know what it is yet. I've got multiple other things in the cooker that I just got to get them done. So that Wednesday that like takes me out of circulation for like 2 days really kind of sucks. So we have had very strong numbers this evening. We provide a last minute report on that. How's that number looking? We were at 180, a spectacular 182 earlier. That may have topped out there. So great numbers tonight. I hope people didn't tune in in hopes of seeing me flame out. So because I made a decision that was not going to happen. So let me put it that way. So everybody have a great night. We will see you all again soon. Don't forget about the show tomorrow.